It is the 17th of August, 1940. 23. Messerschmitt Bf 110s cross the English Channel to escort German bombers to Portland Harbor on the southern coast of Britain. They are the pride of the Luftwaffe, twin-engined, heavily armed, faster than any single-engine fighter in Germany. Hermann Göring calls them his destroyers. This is the story of the heavy fighter that almost failed before finding its destroyer's purpose. The Messerschmitt Bf 110. By the time this formation turns for home, 2. Purpose of these destroyers will be gone, blown out of the sky by British Spitfires. In the weeks that follow, more than 200 will fall the same way. The plane meant to smash the Royal Air Force will need its own escort just to survive. And yet, 4 years from now, in the dark skies over Germany, this same aircraft will become the most feared night hunter of the entire war. To understand how a plane could fail so completely and then be reborn as a killer, we have to go back to a time before any of it began. Back to a design competition held quietly in Berlin in 1934. The Luftwaffe was still a secret then. Germany, under the Distraction Treaty of Versailles, was forbidden from building military aircraft at all. But behind closed doors, a new air force was already taking shape, and its leaders had a dream. That dream had a name: Zerstörer, destroyer, a single, terrifying aircraft that could do the work of 3. It would fly faster than any enemy fighter, carry more guns, range deeper into hostile territory than anything else in the sky. It would clear the way ahead of German bombers and shatter enemy formations from a distance no single-engine fighter could to match. If the concept worked, it would let the Luftwaffe fight anywhere on the continent and win. Willy Messerschmitt bet everything on it. His design was a twin-engine, twin-tailed heavy fighter, sleek, powerful, deliberately built for speed rather than agility. When it flew for the first time on the 12th of May, 1936, it clocked well over 300 miles per hour, faster than the Spitfire prototype, faster than any operational fighter in the world at the time. Göring loved it. He personally championed the Bf 110 as the flagship of the new Luftwaffe. Its pilots were told they were the elite, the best of the best, when Poland was invaded on the 1st of September, 1939. The destroyer squadrons went to war expecting to prove the concept in a single campaign, and for a while they did. Over Poland, the Bf 110 performed exactly as promised. Polish fighters were slower, lighter, hopelessly outclassed. The destroyer squadrons ran up kill counts, opened corridors for the bombers, and returned home with barely a scratch. Then came Norway. In the spring of 1940, Bf 110s flew long-range missions across the North Sea, tore into the outdated Gladiators of the Royal Air Force, and covered German paratroopers as they seized airfields deep behind enemy lines. Then France, the same story. Hurricanes and French Morans could not catch the destroyer in level flight. Bombers under Bf 110 escort punched through Allied defenses and hammered strongholds into surrender. By June of 1940, the Luftwaffe controlled the skies over half of Europe. Every campaign confirmed the destroyer concept. Every after-action report seemed to prove Göring right. There was only one country left to break, and it was just 22 miles across the water. The plan was simple: send the bombers over, let the destroyers escort, tell them in, grind down fighter command until Britain sued for peace. Nobody in the Luftwaffe expected what happened next. The Battle of Britain began in earnest in July of 1940 and reached its full intensity in August. From the first day, something was wrong. The Bf 110 was fast in a straight line, But the Spitfire and the Hurricane were not fighting in straight lines. British pilots pulled tight, sudden turns that the 4-ton German heavy fighter simply could not follow. Over the coast of Kent, over the fields of Sussex, over the Channel itself, the destroyers were caught, outturned, and shot down in numbers that stunned the German high command. On the 18th of August alone, a single Bf 110 squadron lost 7 aircraft in one engagement. In desperation, the destroyer crews adopted a tactic that would have been unthinkable a year earlier: the defensive circle. When enemy fighters attacked, the Bf 110s would form a wide, rotating ring, each aircraft covering the tail of the one in front. It kept them alive. It also meant they had stopped protecting anything else. The escorts now needed escorts. Bf 109s had to be pulled off offensive sweeps to shepherd the destroyers home. Then came the 15th of September, the day the Luftwaffe would remember as Battle of Britain Day. Wave after wave of bombers went out. Wave after wave came back battered. The Bf 110 formations lost heavily again. By the end of the campaign, the Luftwaffe had begun the battle with 237 Bf 110s. It lost more than 200 of them in a matter of weeks. Reports flowed back to Berlin. The pilots knew, the engineers knew, and Goering eventually knew. The destroyer concept had failed, not partially, completely. The aircraft that was supposed to dominate the skies over Britain had been beaten by planes it should have outclassed on paper, and it had been beaten badly enough that the Luftwaffe quietly withdrew its Bf 110 units from the Channel front. In the corridors of the Reich Air Ministry, engineers began to speak of the destroyer in the past tense. Some suggested canceling the production line entirely. Willy Messerschmitt was told to design a replacement. Except the story didn't end there. The Luftwaffe still had thousands of Bf 110s on its books and no immediate replacement in production. So the aircraft was quietly shipped east and south. It flew ground attack missions over Yugoslavia and Greece. It escorted transport aircraft to Rommel in North Africa. It flew fighter bomber sweeps over the path Soviet Union, where the sheer weight of its firepower could still tear into Soviet columns and airfields. It was useful, but it was no longer the star of the show. For most of 1941 and 1942, the Bf 110 drifted between roles the way a general drifts between commands after a public failure. Somewhere the aircraft could fly, somewhere the guns could be used, somewhere its embarrassment could be quietly buried. Squadrons that had once bragged about being the elite of the Luftwaffe now flew workman-like patrols over the Balkans and the Caucasus, watching their comrades and single-engine fighters chase the glory the destroyer had been meant to claim. Then, in the dark over Germany itself, something changed. The Royal Air Force had learned a lesson of its own during the Battle of Britain. Bombing in daylight against a determined defense was suicide. So, Bomber Command turned to darkness. Beginning in 1941 and accelerating dramatically through 1942, RAF, heavy bombers, Wellingtons, Stirlings, Halifaxes, and soon the 4-engine Avro Lancasters began pouring into German airspace by night. They came in the hundreds. They came from every direction. They set fire to Cologne, Hamburg, to Essen, Berlin. And for a long time, there was very little Germany could do to stop them. The Luftwaffe's day fighters, the Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190 were superb machines in daylight. In the dark, they were nearly useless. A single-engine fighter had no room for a radar operator. No radar to speak of, no way to find a bomber in the black. Except by moonlight and luck. Germany needed a night fighter. Fast, big enough to carry a bay, second crewman and heavy equipment, long-ranged enough to loiter and hunt. Someone in the Luftwaffe looked at the Bf-110 sitting in the reserve depots, the finance, failed destroyer, the embarrassment of the Battle of Britain, and saw something everyone else had missed. Twin engines meant power to spare for heavy equipment. A second crewman meant an operator for a radar set. Long range meant time in the sky. The very features that had made the aircraft too heavy to dogfight, the Spitfire, made it perfect for hunting bombers in the dark. The order was given: convert the destroyer. They fitted it with a radar system called Liechtenstein, an ungainly array of antennae that jutted from the nose like the antlers of a stag. The antennae cost the aircraft speed. It didn't matter. The Bf-110 was not chasing anything fast anymore. It was chasing bombers, and bombers flew slow and straight and in tight streams, and radar could find them in the dark from miles away. Then came a modification. Even the Allied crews would take nearly 2 years to understand. German engineers mounted a pair of 20mm cannons in the rear of the Bf-110's cabin, pointed upward at a sharp angle. The pilot could slide beneath a panico bomber, match its speed, and fire straight up into the fuel tanks and bomb bay from below. The bomber crews never saw him coming. There were no tracers. There was no warning. Just an aircraft that had been flying steadily one moment and was tumbling in flames the next. The Germans called this installation Schräge Musik, jazz music, after the day, slanted, off-tempo angle of the guns. The Bf-110s were formed into a new command, the Nachtjagd, the night hunt. Whole wings of them, hundreds of aircraft, based in occupied Belgium, Holland, and northern Germany. Coordinated by ground radar and controllers on the ground, they climbed to intercept the RAF bomber streams as they crossed the coast. By the middle of 1943, the Bf-110 had become the single most numerous night fighter in the Luftwaffe, and the RAF began to notice something terrible. Their loss rates were climbing fast. By the winter of 1943 and into 1944, Bomber Command was losing more than 5% of its aircraft on some raids. Behind those losses was a growing list of names. German pilots whose kill totals were climbing into figures nobody had thought possible. None climbed higher than Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer. He was 20 years old when he flew his first night fighter mission. He was 22 when the Luftwaffe promoted him to command an entire night fighter wing, the youngest wing commander in the German armed forces. He flew from a base at Sint-Truiden in occupied Belgium. The British called him the Spook of St. Trond. His own men called him simply the Major. On the 21st of February, 1945, in a single night, Schnaufer shot down 9 RAF Lancaster heavy bombers, 2 before dinner, 7. After flying a Bf-110 equipped with radar and Schrage music, 9 bombers meant 63 men lost in the space of a few hours to 1 German peloton, 1 German aircraft. By the end of the war, Schnaufer had shot down 121 heavy bombers in 164 combat sorties. The kill markings painted on the twin tail fins of his Bf-110, a small silhouette of an aircraft for each victim, dated and neatly aligned in rows, accounted for the deaths of approximately 850 Allied airmen. He remains, to this day, the highest-scoring night fighter pilot in the high history of aerial warfare, and he did almost all of Iten, a machine that, 5 years earlier, the German Air Ministry had wanted to scrap. Schnaufer was not alone. Dozens of Bf-110 pilots became aces of the night. Schnaufer's own three-man crew, his radio operator and his gunner, remained the only night fighter crew of the entire war in which every man was decorated with the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. Together, in the machine that had failed at Portland Harbor, they held the line against RAF Bomber Command night after night, deep into 1945. More than 6,000 Bf-110s were built during the war. In 1944 alone, more than 1,500 rolled off German assembly lines, most of them as night fighters. Of all the aircraft the Luftwaffe fielded in World War II, only a handful destroyed more Allied airmen, and none did a role for which they had never been designed. The Bf-110 never fully redeemed its daylight reputation. It could not stand up to American Thunderbolts and Mustangs when they finally reached deep into the Reich in the spring of 1944. It was, in the end, a 1930s design, flying against 1940s fighters that had learned every lesson the destroyer's failures had taught. But between the disaster of the Battle of Britain and the final collapse in 1945, it did something almost no other aircraft in the war managed to do. It failed. It was written off. It was reborn. And in its second life, it became more deadly than anyone had imagined it could ever have been in its first. 2 Bf-110s still exist in the world today. One at the Royal Air Force Museum in London. One at the Norwegian Aviation Museum. The tail fins of Schnaufer's own aircraft, the fins painted with 121 small silhouettes, are preserved at the Imperial War Museum, alongside a second fin at the Australian War Memorial in Pam, Canberra. The aircraft that Goering's engineers wanted to cancel outlived the war it fought in, and it outlived, in its ghost, the men who first dismissed it. So, was the Bf-110 a failure that got lucky in the dark? Or was it the most misunderstood aircraft of the entire Luftwaffe? The comments are open. Tell us what you think. If this video kept you watching to the end, tap the like button. It tells YouTube's algorithm to show this story to more people who love forgotten aircraft, and it means we can keep making them. Next time, we cover the German medium bomber that ended up flying more mission types than any other aircraft of the war-fast bomber, dive bomber, torpedo carrier, reconnaissance plane, and by the end, the other half of the Nachtjagd hunting RAF bombers at night, alongside the very Bf-110s you just watched. Subscribe so it lands in your feed when it drops. Thanks for watching.